Happy New Year to everyone. Yes, it's hard to believe, but it is 2023, and it's not even the first day of 2023. I think it's like, I don't know, day 3 or day 4. It has been such a whirlwind holiday season for me. I got to spend time with family and friends and do some of those things that just make me super happy, including going to some of my favorite restaurants and doing some of the traditional things that I did as a kid with my daughters and my son and my husband and all of my family. So I am just super elated. I had a phenomenal 2022 and I'm super excited about 2023. But we had some big blockbuster stories and events that happened in 2022. And I had some amazing guests throughout the year that helped us make sense of those stories, whether it was related to politics or the entertainment industry or stories about phenomenal women. We brought it all to you at the special report. And today on the show, I have 4 of my favorite guests. I can't say, it's like a mother. See, when you start naming your children and saying the word favorite, you always get into trouble because all of my guests were my favorites. But these 4 helped me throughout 2022 make sense of some of these big stories. And so they're going to join me this morning. We're going to talk about politics. We're going to talk about entertainment. We're going to talk about women, and particularly Black women. And we're going to talk about COVID because everyone probably knows someone that got COVID in 2022 and is wondering what should we expect in 2023 as it relates to COVID-19. So got a big full show for you today with lots of information. Stay tuned and you're going to see some of my favorite guests. We're going to talk about some of those big stories all coming up next.
Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report with Areva Martin.
My first guest this morning is Reggie Ponder. He was with us all through 2022, bringing us the biggest entertainment stories. And he's back today to help us get ready for what's on the horizon for 2023. It's kind of hard to say that, Reggie, but welcome back. You are film critic extraordinaire. We see you on TV. We hear you on the radio. We know you've written some incredible opinion pieces in 2022. What are you looking forward to in this new year as it relates to entertainment stories?
Well, the first thing is Happy New Year, Areva. Just to make sure that
I can count on you to bring the funk. Good morning. I love those glasses. Well, you know what, Reggie? Before we jump to 23, we got to go back. We didn't do our regular recap show for 2022, so this is both recap and projecting the future. So let's talk about 2022. What were some of the biggest entertainment stories in 2022?
Well, I want to start. I'm going to end with the biggest, but I want to start with the diversity report and just talk a little bit about Hollywood diversity. Is that you had on some wonderful people all throughout the year talking about Hollywood diversity, and when we talk about it, it's like a couple of steps forward and then a couple of steps back. And what I mean by that is that you can't have everybody all the time. So it's either some Black people and nobody else, or it's either some Latinx people and a few Black people, but it can't be people with disabilities, plus Black people, plus Asian people, plus Latin folks. We can't have them all at the same time. So we have...
Reggie, wait a minute. That's what the world is. That's how we live. That's how our society is composed. So why can't we have all of those demographics represented at the same time?
Because that means that there'll be a shift in power, and that the people who get the awards probably wouldn't get all the awards, that the Meryl Streeps of the world would have to share with the Angela Bassett's of the world. And that's no shade to a Meryl Streep. But what about Angela Bassett? She's never been nominated for an Academy Award. And we can talk about a lot of folks in that way. So what I think we saw in 2022 is we did see some steps forward, and your panelists came forward and said that. It's like, wow, we saw some steps forward in terms of the types of movies and types of roles that people had, even in some movement with women in that area. But that movement wasn't great enough. And that's what I would want to say about that. And I know you have some other folks that will be able to punctuate that point, but I think that that's a very, very important point as we talk about 2022.
It's interesting that you say that, Reggie, because at this time that you're saying that, and I agree with you wholeheartedly, because I was going to ask you about a list I saw for 23 that really punctuates that point. But we did have Wakanda Forever, and we had Woman King. So we had some blockbuster movies where African-American females, particularly Angela Bassett, who you mentioned, were front and center. And now Angela Bassett, do you think she's going to be recognized for the bigger role she played in Wakanda Forever?
I think she should. There's a scene in Wakanda Forever where she basically has a monologue, and it is so freaking powerful that it showcases what we've known all along, that this is a powerful force. She's been regarded as one of the best actors there is, but hasn't been regarded as one of the best actors there is. So yes, I do think so. I'd like to also just mention a few other films if I could, because we did have a number of films as it relates to blacks in of African-American folks. And you talk about The Inspection, which is receiving a lot of award consideration and buzz and talk. There's The Nanny, that if you haven't seen it, which is one that has been receiving some critical acclaim. There's also Wendell and Wild, which is a animation film. And of course, there was Nope. And there's plenty other ones like Deception, the new Whitney Houston movie, so on and so forth. So there were some, and I'm just speaking about black movies at this point, but there were some gains there. I do want to say from an Asian perspective, the biggest movie that's out is Everything Everywhere All at Once. And about time. Michelle Yeoh, look, if she's the best. I'm just saying, and she should get all of the accolades and credits that she should. This role allowed her to show some other sides of her that I think that folks maybe have not recognized. So I do think that there's, again, some progress, but it's going to be Michelle and maybe nobody else. I mean, that's just how Hollywood works.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Michelle and that role, and you're right. Unfortunately, it's not likely that Michelle and Angela, right, are going to be highlighted. Although we're going to talk about Shirley Ralph. We can't talk about 2022 without talking about how big of a year it was for her in Abbott Elementary. And Niecy Nash. Niecy Nash has just had a breakout. I won't even say year, seems like a period. But let's talk a little bit about Best Man Final Chapter. Everybody was binging that over the Christmas break. It came out in this unusual format, not the third, installment on the big screen, but these 8 episodes that aired on Paramount. And I don't know a person, an African-American person that did not binge that. And then there was the Breakfast Club survey about Taye Diggs's role and Sanaa Lathan. Who was right? Who was wrong? Was he wrong for not marrying, the Nia Long character in the first movie? And should she be taking the daughter to Africa? So tell us, what was that about these 8 episodes? And why did it come out in that format and not a third big, screen installment?
That's a really great segue, Areva, is that when I talk about some steps forward and steps backwards, part of the step backward is that Malcolm couldn't get the funding for the third movie. He actually wrote the third movie and he had an idea for the fourth movie, but he couldn't get the funding. So he kind of reconfigured it. Some people talked to him about maybe bringing that from a television perspective. So the blessing there is that they were able to delve deeper into these individual characters. But the message there is saying, now let me think about this. Here are 2 movies, iconic movies that did well in the African-American community, and he couldn't get the funding? Wow, really interesting. Now, as it relates to these characters, there's the mess, there's the mayhem, and people love that. They love seeing that in these characters. And I think what it is that what Malcolm and his writers and his group of writers were able to tap into is that these are real people with real problems, and they have their own fallacies and regrets. And so, okay, it's fun probably to say who he should have married in the beginning and this and that and the other, but it's also interesting to see how all of that played out. And I don't want to say how it all played out because some people probably haven't watched it. I know a lot of people binged it over the holidays, but there's some folks that are still trying to catch up. They did a really good job.
Do you know what the third movie would have been? Because obviously the 8 episodes, as you said, gave him an opportunity to develop each of the characters and give them much larger storylines. We wouldn't have seen that kind of development in a, hour, 20-minute movie. Do you know what that movie would have looked like? Was that released?
He didn't say.
Okay.
He didn't say, and I will say that you're saying an hour and 20-minute movie, at least 2 hours. Come on, stop it. But he couldn't get the funding for it, and he didn't really say. And much like Ryan Coogler didn't really say a lot about what his total thought was about the movie he wrote for Chadwick Boseman before Chadwick died. You get a little bit of what he was thinking, but you didn't get all of that. And I just think that it's almost like ruining it in some kind of way or some form or fashion.
Now we saw, Reggie, Emancipation, Will Smith's big movie where it was touted that maybe he would get another Oscar nod. That came out at the end of the year as well. Did the big slap that was heard around the world impact viewership of Emancipation?
I think it has, and it really begs the question of someone who would be what I would call a first offender now all of a sudden being shunned in such a way. Is there an opportunity for him to redeem himself? Is there room for grace? Is there room for people to say, okay, well, we get it that you kind of went off the rails here or whatever? But I think a lot of people aren't watching it. But here's the other problem: is it's a slave movie too.
Yeah.
Is that we say this all the time. We just don't want to see these slave movies. But the difference here is that Will Smith plays Peter Smith. And that's that iconic image that you see where the Peter Smith with the welts and the things on his back. That's that iconic image that a lot of us have seen, but a lot of us didn't even know who that person was and what that image referred to. So here's a man who freed himself. So this was a movie that was not about what you would call a white slave savior. So there was no white savior here. And so it's a different type of slave movie. And I really wish that people would go and check it out. Will Smith is phenomenal in this movie, and he probably would have received a nomination. And that brings me to a couple of things, because I know we don't have all day to talk about everything, even though you should just have me on all day. But I know you got some great guests after me.
I'm thinking about all the things that happened in entertainment. It was so much in 2022. My goodness.
It was. So I want to talk about the awards just really quickly. Is that when you look at the Critics' Choice Awards, Will Smith, Troy Kotsur, Adriana DeBose, Jane Campion, when you look at that, that's a really nice, diverse slate. You get somebody from a disability perspective, you get African-American, you have Adriana Latin, Afro-Latina, and then you have a woman win Best Director. The Golden Globes were very similar, and they added West Side Story in there, so now you got some Latinx there as well. And then when you look at the Oscars last year, you had Coda, Smith, Champion, DeBose, Summer of Soul, Kotsur, the Queen of Basketball, which I really hope people would go see. That short was absolutely fantastic. So what I'll say is that this brings us back to the slap. It really brings us back to the slap. Will Smith's slap really altered what we talked about in 2022. And it damaged the Oscars so much that Summer of Soul didn't get the kind of love that they should have really got, and that pun was intended. The Queen of Basketball, all the other things that happened, they didn't get their just due, and unfortunately, Will Smith was the person who did that and destroyed that for them, and also destroyed some things for himself. So those would be the things in 2022. Real quickly in 2023 is that we're looking for the new award season. So the question is, and I already brought up some of these movies, is that the question is, how will this award season look? will it look like we have some real diversity in the award season? And I believe, just because of what I see every year, is we're going to get a little and we're going to get a little. So there's going to be a little here and a little there, but there's going to be a lot of people disappointed. There's going to, and that happens every year. So I do have to plug a couple of awards. I am a member of the Critics' Choice Awards, and it's going to appear this Sunday, but it'll appear Sunday, January the 15th. It is hosted by Chesley Handler on the CW from 7 to 10 Eastern time. So I'm hoping people will check it out, because Janelle Monáe is getting the She/Her Award. I do want to tell you really quickly is that I saw I saw her at the premiere of the movie Glass Onion, and everybody was trying to get a picture. And I said to her, "Look, I'm not going to try to get a picture. I just want to be able to say that I danced with you. There was some music in the background. I did a couple of moves. She did a move back to me. So I just want to say, for the record, I danced with Janelle Monáe. So I just need you to know that for the record."
Well, I'm glad you brought that up real quickly, because that Glass Onion, they've already been slated for a third and fourth installment. And she is fantastic. I did watch that over the holiday seasons as well. Real quickly, 2023, speaking to that diversity question again, I saw a list of what you should be looking for in new movies and TV shows, not the diversity that we saw in 21 and 22 in the shows. A little surprised by that, but the 1619 Project is coming out in a documentary on Hulu at the end of January. Super excited for that. Not surprised, knew it was in the works. Well, what are your expectations for that? So controversial, so loved by some and hated by others. But given the climate, the Democratic Party kind of in control right now, do you think that's going to, have a big impact?
My expectation is that the project came to us in excellence, and what we're going to see is continued excellence with this particular project. I just don't see how you couldn't. When I listened to, I was introduced to it via podcast, and I listened to it. It was so powerful, Areva. I just cannot see how this wouldn't be a phenomenal project. So I'm expecting excellence from this project. And I think, as you see various communities and states ban different books and programming and things of that nature, this will just fall into the queue of some of that kind of material that people are saying is already has, like you can't teach it, you can't show it. So I think that it's going to meet with some serious resistance, but I think there's going to be a very, very important project, and I'm so happy that they put it out there. I'd love to mention one other thing, if I could, before we get off. And that is that I understand why people every year are upset with these in memory of people who died every year, tributes. I understand why, because I looked at the whole list of all these folks, and I wanted to mention some. And as I was looking at it, it was like I would be on your show for 150 hours talking about all the people who passed away this year. But I think that we should just mention a few of them, and I do want to. Sidney Poitier would be at the top of my list. If you only give me one person that I could mention, that would be Sidney Poitier. He was a person who I really wanted to meet. I'm not starstruck by folks, but this was one of those people that I want to meet. So I'm going to stop for a moment and ask, did you meet Sidney Poitier?
I did, and I met him at a restaurant called Spago, a Wolfgang Puck, famous restaurant here in Beverly Hills, California. I did have the honor and privilege of meeting him in that restaurant. Bigger than life. I mean, his presence in that restaurant was just enormous. But you're right. We've lost so many talented, amazing people. And when they do scroll those names, you're always thinking about who's not there. But obviously, everyone can't be mentioned. But on a positive note, Gerard Carmichael is hosting the Golden Globes. Here is this young African-American comic, comes out as gay, talks about his struggles being a gay Black man, and he goes from that really dark, not too funny, but really kind of sad HBO special to now this big job hosting the Golden Globes. I think that's what I'm looking most forward to in the awards season. There's going to be lots of other things happening, but that just warms my heart to see him in the journey that he's been on, and now to have it, I won't say culminate, because in many ways this is probably just the beginning of his even bigger blow up, but I'm super excited about that.
I want to say is that the problem we have with these folks is that we think that they just came on the scene. He's been working. He's been out there putting in, so he's actually not as young as you think. And when you talk about the
35 or so,
I know, but I mean, but has been putting in the work.
And he's going to be 120, so in the relative terms, he's young.
And when you talk about the Quinta Brunsons of the world, I mean, they're out there. They've been working. They've been putting in the work, and they're getting their just desserts. I think that this year is going to be, again, a mixed year. What we did not talk about is how COVID has impacted the movie industry. The only thing that I'll say about that is that it is rebounding somewhat, but people are really determining whether a movie is worth going to the movie for now, and as opposed to watching it at home. They're like, I want to see that movie, but I think I might.
And I'm one of those. I haven't gone back yet. I'm just waiting. I've gotten so accustomed to seeing them at home. Okay, Reggie, I got to let you go because you and I will be here for a long time. Because everything you say reminds me of something else that happened. But thank you so much. In some ways, I just want to give you my gratitude, express to you my gratitude for just helping us understand and bringing us up to date and keeping us on point as it relates to the entertainment industry throughout 2022. Love the glasses, love the predictions for 23. It's going to be a blockbuster year for a lot of folks in the entertainment industry. And again, we'll be talking with you as we try to make sense of this year. Have a wonderful January and rest of your 2023. It's early, but I appreciate you. All right, my next guest is Professor Treva Lindsay. She was with us also throughout 2022, making sense of what was happening around women, particularly Black women. And this was 2022. Again, a big year for women, starting with the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Good morning and Happy New Year, Professor Lindsay.
Good morning. Happy New Year to you as well.
Oh, wow. So much happened for women. You can't really talk about 22 without talking about the overturning of Roe v. Wade. I'm getting the notices now for the Women's March that's coming up in 23. And I'm just wondering, remember the energy around the march after Trump was elected? I'm imagining that same energy might attached to this year's march because of the overturning of Roe v. Wade. But help us understand how just, monumental the Dobbs decision was in terms of women.
Yes, I think it really was a moment of reckoning with recognizing just where we were in this nation around bodily autonomy and particularly around and specifically around women's rights in their bodies, that a body that is not constituted of primarily women or people who can bear children ultimately decided that they can regulate how we engage reproductive autonomy. And you saw immediately after that decision, states putting in some of the most restrictive abortion laws we've seen in decades. And so it was an acute reminder, as so many Black women activists in particular and other women of color, when Roe v. Wade was initially enacted 50 years ago, that Roe was always the floor because there were always these states pushing back and looking for ways to restrict. And this just gave that kind of green light to these states to put in these restrictive measures, and really now demanding that folks within states such as mine, I'm in Ohio, that are pushing through very restrictive abortion laws, that we are as organizers and educators and people trying to support people who do not want to be pregnant, that don't want to be under the guise of forced pregnancy and coerced pregnancy, have resources and opportunities to decide their own bodily autonomy. So I think you're going to see incredible waves in terms of organizing at the national level as well as at the local level. And I think we've already seen that. We saw that at the polls, that we did see a number of women and girls and supporters of those with gestational capacity head to the polls to help kind of stave off some of the worst of what is already occurring in the wake of Roe v. Wade being overturned.
Yeah, we saw women, and particularly young women, being underestimated as it related to the midterms and the impact that they would have on elections, which is why, as we sit here today, we only have, a House that is barely, at the minimum, controlled by Republicans when there was a prediction of this big red wave. And we see the Democrats holding and gaining a seat in the U.S. Senate. And a lot of that is, credited to the vote of young women who were responding to Dobbs. I also want to talk about a couple other big stories as it relates to women. The trial of Amber Heard, Johnny Depp. We saw Amber Heard just vilified on social media and in the media. And then we saw a repeat of that with Megan Thee Stallion at the end of the year, the trial, and she wasn't even on trial, but just her testimony against Tory Lanez, the rapper who shot her in the foot. She comes forward, makes a police report after, saying that she had cut her foot on glass. And now Megan, like Amber Heard, becomes the villain. What's going on with celebrity men and this way that we treat women who dare stand up to them?
Well, unfortunately, I think celebrity culture in this way can become a mirror for what happens with so many women and so many victims of interpersonal and intimate partner violence, that often you're not believed, that we're still in an uphill climb, that in spite of having a tremendous movement like Me Too, or having more conversations and more thoughtful conversations around believing victims, trying to step away from victim blaming, trying to really address how sexism and misogyny show up in our society, that we're still not as far as we need to be. And we can look at these celebrity trials and see how power and money and influence and social media and misinformation and sexism and misogyny, and in the case of Meg Thee Stallion, and anti-Black misogyny, misogynoir, all combine to produce really this absurd and vilifying storm that then is just attacking these women. And you see so many people attacked in that moment. So you see someone like a Megan Thee Stallion, who is a young woman. And I think people often forget that as well. She was 25 when she was shot, and now 27. And she doesn't have her mother. She doesn't have her grandmother. She doesn't have this close network of people around her. And people were calling it the Megan Thee Stallion trial. And as you noted, she was a witness. She is the victim. She is anything but the person. And yet her sexual history, her veracity, all of this was put on trial. And we saw how easily misinformation could lead to people doubling down on the kind of misogyny that we've seen often in celebrity culture, but in American society more broadly, and sadly throughout the world.
Yeah, and it wasn't, in addition to the, attacks on her, as you said, her sexual life, who she slept with, who she didn't sleep with, was this notion that somehow she shouldn't even come clean. She shouldn't tell the truth. She shouldn't file a police report. She shouldn't ask that this celebrity rapper be held accountable, as if Black women have an obligation to take abuse from Black men, and now somehow we are to shield that Black man or Black men in general from accountability and punishment. People were attacking her like, oh, here goes another Black man in the system. Well, hello, another Black man shouldn't be shooting a Black woman or anyone. And if he makes that choice, he has to be held accountable. And it's not her responsibility to now put the weight of mass incarceration and the problems with the criminal justice system now all become her burden. That was what was so appalling to me in this whole fight. And I have a daughter around her age too, actually, and they were just so done with the way she was treated. Not to mention that the rapper, while out on trial, assaults someone else. So the guy's obviously out of control, violent, and needs to be held accountable. Now, obviously, I do not want this man to go to jail for 20 years, which is what he could face for shooting her in the foot. It's violent, but she didn't die. She's, so there should be accountability, but we do not endorse, you and I, mass incarceration. So no, we don't want him in jail for 20 years. But yes, he does need to be held accountable. Why does that message, I mean, that just didn't hit people the way that it should have. And somehow now she is responsible for everything that's wrong in the criminal justice system as it relates to Black men. And no, she's not.
Right. I mean, how did this 27-year-old Black woman become the core of the issue about targeted mass incarceration and the long and very real and sordid history of Black men being criminalized within the United States, that she suddenly becomes the figure at the center of this storm, when if we remember correctly and go back to the timeline, Meg initially does not identify him. She doesn't even say that she's been shot because she's attempting to protect herself, to protect him, to protect everyone on the scene. She doesn't want to go to the criminal legal system at first, right? She's going to do the thing that so many Black women and girls do when they're attacked, which is to silently endure and unequivocally protect. Because in some way, she knows that she could be vilified for coming forward about what happened to her. But in addition to that decision, when she isn't identifying him, then he's going to media, other people are going to media, other people are going.
Oh my God, he makes a whole song.
God, she's been really shot. All of these egregious things are happening at this moment. And so she has to come forward and say, this is what happened to me. And yes, you did shoot me. And how horrific that must be, that the person who harmed you is someone you cared about. That when people are like, well, why didn't she say it at first? Or why didn't she do this? Why didn't she say she had sex when she had sex with them when she did? All of these other things. And I'm like, imagine how embarrassing and hurtful it is that someone you trusted with your heart, with your body, to let into your personal space is the person who harmed you. But so often when Black women and girls are harmed, it is by someone they know. It is by someone who they have extended care to, someone they might even love. So there's an incredible difficulty that comes along with that. And this notion of accountability gets thrown out the window for so many people when you have someone who fits into a narrative of history in which Black men are hypercriminalized as seen as violent and seen as needing of being, pathologically seen as criminal. And that ignores the history in which Black women are not often treated fairly within the criminal legal system either. And that system has long been a system that has not adjudicated domestic violence and interpersonal violence well. And Meg was at the intersection of that, a failure on both ends. And still, she's the only one who was harmed. She was shot.
Yeah, I hate, Black women. We talk about that for hours on hours. So many successful things happen, so many amazing things in 2022. I was looking at my own journey, including being at the White House when the announcement of Ketanji Brown Jackson was made public. So we have that incredible, successful, unbelievable accomplishment for Black women. And, we can think about things like Karen Bass being elected the first Black female mayor of the city of Los Angeles. And, we have first Black, well, I don't know if she's the first Black, but a Black female DA in San Francisco, and just so many other incredible things that Black women accomplished in 2022. Before I let you go, I want to ask you about this new trend, though, amongst young women, mostly Black women, the soft girl journey, trending on TikTok, this whole kind of, I guess, response to Black girl magic, to Black excellence, to girl boss. Now this notion that radical self-care should be the order of the day, that we should not be, buying into this super ambitious, hyper accomplished Black woman, kind of a caricature, which has been painted of Black women that, we're so super strong. We put the weight of the world on our backs, that we should just emote, feel, don't get out of bed, don't put on makeup, don't put our weave in, whatever it is we want to do, just be and make our own self-care the order of the day. Is that the way we should be thinking about 2023? Or does that movement, it's hard for me, and I'm trying to accept it, not an era that I grew up in. My daughters, we're having this conversation. Help us understand what it's all about, and is it what's going to really become the new hashtag and the new lifestyle of young women?
Yes. I mean, I'm always excited that young Black women are trying to figure out how do we navigate a world in which there are so many demands on us. And those demands are real. We know the strong Black woman trope that's been around for decades. We have Michelle Wallace in the 70s talking about the myth of the superwoman. You have people like Joan Morgan and her hip hop feminist, When Chicken Heads Come Home to Roost, talking about and deconstructing the strong Black woman. We have Audre Lorde telling us, right, that self-care is not indulgent, right? This is about our survival. And we had a bestseller this year by Black woman Trisha Hersey, The Nap Ministry, that is really encouraging the radical practice of Black rest as resistance. And so I think that there's something really incredible about young girls saying, I want to just be, not have to be extraordinary, not have to be excellent, just be. And so often our response to the ways that white supremacy and sexism and misogyny operate in our lives has been to be above and beyond, to be excellent, to go that extra mile. We all get that talk when we're younger that you got to be twice as good to get half as far. And so I appreciate that there's a movement to resist that, to lean into our own selves, to really create spaces of comfort and rest and indulging in us to be self-possessed. And I think many of us can take a cue from this generation doing that and integrate that into our own practices, even if we continue to be high achieving and people who are excited by the work that we do, that we are prioritizing ourselves, we are prioritizing our rest and seeing our care for ourselves and the care we extend to others be reciprocated in meaningful and robust ways.
All right. So are you like on your soft life journey? I'm struggling. I'm going to be honest. I'm struggling with it. You know, it's hard. Old habits die hard. And that message of being twice as good and working twice as hard is a hard message. And I was trying to explain to my daughters. The conversation came up because when my daughter, one of them is in a graduate JD MBA program at Columbia, and she was telling me how difficult it is and some of the issues she was having. And my instinct is always, here's the solution to those problems. And she's like, Mom, I don't want a solution. I just want to tell you and just have you listen. And I was like, oh my God, there's people don't want solutions. So I was really just don't want to. So, my generation says that's whining. And there, you got a problem, here's a solution. So that's how this conversation has been playing out in my own life. And now I'm trying to understand that there is something just called listening, right? Over there, you don't have to solve every problem. So help, you got any tips for me? I guess I'm struggling here. How do I get on my soft life journey without disavowing everything my mother and grandmother taught me about being twice as good?
Right. And I mean, I'm in that struggle with you, right? I feel like I'm that bridge generation, right? I consider they're called as geriatric millennials or exennials, that micro generation, late 70s, early 80s babies. And I think what I'm learning from my students, what I'm learning from them is that they are really trying to construct a different kind of world, that part of creating softness is also creating the conditions in which softness is possible. And so I think I can be part of that work. I'm on sabbatical this semester and I'm like, rest. I actually need to think about and learn how to rest because it isn't something I've done in decades. And so I really want to embrace that. So I think I will be looking to Gen Z and the kind of younger millennials or maybe even Gen Alpha as they begin to emerge to look at how one does that. But I think I want to be part of the generations of women who are looking and learning from and in conversation with these younger folks who are trying to create this and create the conditions in which we don't have to tell our daughters and children that you have to be twice as good, right? What does it mean to create a world in which that old adage is no longer true? And I think that's part of creating the context in which soft life can be affirmed. Not just internally, but affirmed broadly, that we're saying we want a different relationship to labor. We want a different relationship to how we show up in the world. We want a different relationship to love. We want a different relationship to intimacy. And I think that's a good thing for us to reflect on and hear what they're saying and also realize our, attention and attraction to this grind, the rise and grind model, and what that's cost us in terms of our health, in terms of our well-being, in terms of our relationships. So I think as long as it's a conversation among us and that we're learning from each other, that I think we're going to head in some good directions, all get a little softer while still being the dynamic forces that Black women have been for generations.
All right, so you hit me up with tips, strategies, affirmation, because that rise and grind is what has gotten us here, and that's what I was telling my kids. Like, okay, I know you all don't like it, but you kind of at that Ivy League school because Mama been rising and grinding. so don't be too hard on me. So, but I'm looking forward to yours. I'm gonna live vicariously through your sabbatical, and we'll get through this together. Thank you so much, Professor Lindsay. I know you're going to have some great things come out of the sabbatical in addition to rest. And lots of rest, I hope. But I look forward to talking with you in 2023. Lots of things to look forward to and be hopeful about as we try to soften our journey. Okay, we'll leave it at that. Always good to see you, my friend.
Good to see you, Ziva. Take care.
All right. Next up, we're talking to Richard Green about the biggest stories in 2022 in politics. And oh my goodness, was this an incredible year for Democrats in so many ways. Hey, Richard, good morning. I think we got to get your audio going, Richard.
So first of all, you think I should know that by now, right? First of all, I have to add my own Sidney Poitier West Hollywood hip restaurant story.
Okay.
And I agree with Reggie. There are very few human beings I've ever met in my life, and I've met a lot of really cool people around the world who were as stunningly charismatic as Sidney Poitier. I mean, it was like a force field. And we were having this lovely conversation, and then at Craig's, and this guy is like pushing to get into the conversation. And it's like, who the hell is this guy? Get away, dude, right? Because I'm so focused on Sidney. And then he keeps pushing, and I look, and it's George Clooney, who wants to get him a piece of Sidney. And it's like, okay, George, come on in. Let's have the conversation. But I'm telling you, as impressive as George Clooney is, the king of the entire city in that moment and everywhere he went was Sidney. I was
the
very
fact
upset.
that George was fighting for his own Sidney FaceTime tells us everything we need to know about Sidney. And
Everything.
Yes, I dropped Spago, you dropped Craig's. Yes, if you live in LA, Richard and I hang out at some pretty cool places. Okay, Richard, so.
Just trying to keep up with you, Areva.
Okay, and I got to slow down according to Professor Lindsay. Richard, let me ask you this about 2022 in politics. I was stunned by this article in the New York Times that I read that said that pollsters in 2022 got it wrong, but it wasn't so much that they got it wrong. It's just this new crop of pollsters, very partisan pollsters, gained prominence in 2022, and they were the ones who were out there predicting the red tsunami, and that lots of traditional political pundits bought into it. And it seemed like such an odd article to me, because I'm thinking, if you are an experienced political pundit, why aren't you checking the sources of these polls? And why would you ever fall for something that's put out by one of these conservative partisan polling organizations? So what was happening in 2022 around polling? I think that's a big story that needs a lot of attention, because we rely so much on these polls to make decisions about who we give money to. And that was kind of what the article said, was that we gave a lot of money to candidates who didn't need it and neglected races that perhaps we could have won. And maybe the Democrats could have held the House had there not been this over response to these really partisan polls.
So I think there are a couple of things to take from it. One is, it's not certain, in my opinion, that we're polling all of the demographics equally, because of cell phones and young people maybe not picking up their phones. That's going to make a big difference. Also, I do think that last minute voting decisions can be made when you go, holy mackerel, look at Herschel Walker, or holy mackerel, look at Carrie Lake. I can't let this happen. I wasn't going to vote, but holy mackerel, this is going to happen. But I think the bigger issue, and this is not only a retrospective on 2022, but the last several years, is we have lost the ability to deal with and to enjoy objective truth. Donald Trump and the whole fake news thing has destroyed news. Sean Hannity, Tucker Carlson, Fox News, right, has destroyed news. You know, we are as far away from Walter Cronkite and some objective consensus reality in news and what's happening in the world as we could possibly be. And I think that is also affecting polling. Everything is now partisan. And we may never, ever return, which is why, if I can just make an awkward segue, what happened last night with Monday Night Football, in many ways, is it's a horrific thing. I mean, I'm almost moved to tears just thinking about it. I mean, that poor young man, what a beautiful man too, right? And what a freak thing. And I just am praying for him. But it was a rare moment in our current reality where we all got to watch the same thing without filters. We all got to see the hit. We all got to see the look on the faces of the other players. We all got to experience something without filters that you can't spin. Mm-hmm. And we felt and feel, I think now, closer together as a nation because of a shared common emotional experience. And I think we have to get back to that, not by having people get almost killed or die potentially on a football field, but to have common experience. And I'll tell you one other thing, which was one of the highlights for me of 2022, is the documentary on Nancy Pelosi. That, to me, and I wrote an email to Nancy's daughter, Christine, who I know, and I say, those kind of documentaries where we get to see the real Nancy Pelosi, we get to see the real human beings who are there dancing with their grandchildren, a little awkwardly, but still so adorably, right? That's what we need to do. We need to humanize politics to get away from, because if you watch that, even if you hated Nancy Pelosi, you go, oh, she's actually kind of cool.
Yeah. No, the young man, obviously you're talking about is Damar Hamlin, who collapsed on the football field and a heart stop beating, who's now in critical condition. Hopefully will make a recovery. Some experts say it's very possible he'll make a full recovery. Obviously, as you said, we all watched that together, and from celebrities to political figures to sports figures, the everybody's heart just went out to him and his family. 2022, yeah, Nancy Pelosi documentary was brilliant. Nancy passing the torch, the era of Nancy Pelosi as the female Speaker of the House, breaking that incredible glass ceiling and being heralded as probably one of the best speakers ever. U.S. Congress, and then passing the torch so brilliantly without disruption of the party, which we're watching as the Republicans are fighting over who to pick as the speaker. She goes, works it out with the leadership team so that the old dudes aren't fighting with the younger folks, and that, that we have now a very diverse leadership team of folks in their 40s and 50s to lead our party. I mean, Democrats did so well. Richard, I don't think we can underscore the success that the Biden administration had, given what many people had were very low expectations. We got to think back to when Biden was running. It was like, we need the white old dude to beat the other white old dude. It wasn't like we need Biden because he's going to be this amazing president. I mean, we have to remember that. I mean, we rewrite history, right, as people gain success, but that was not the overwhelming reason we were voting for Joe Biden. But look at this presidency. Tell us, what has Joe Biden done in 2022 that we should not ever forget?
Well, more legislation that we've been waiting for. I mean, just look at the infrastructure bill. Like Donald Trump, every week it's the infrastructure week. And then Biden comes in and says, okay, we got this handled. It's bipartisan. Let's move on to gun violence prevention. And he did that. And let's move on to climate change, the biggest climate change legislation in the history of the world, Sleepy Joe, on and on and on. And then I saw a TikTok yesterday that was reminding us that it looks like Joe Biden is on the path to curing cancer, for God's sakes. I mean, come on.
And well, cancer is near and dear to him, right? Because of his son, Beau, and his untimely passing from cancer. And when he was out of the White House for that brief period, he was working on cancer moonshots and working on cancer research.
So but back to Nancy Pelosi, I think that was the most classy, graceful exchange of power and stepping down from power that I have ever seen in politics, ever. And Hakeem Jeffries is going to be, he is already a frickin' superstar. You've met him, I've met him. It's like, he's not quite Sidney Poitier yet, but he's an incredibly impressive dude.
Yeah, no, he is, and he's going to be great in that position. Quickly, Richard, 2023, what's going to happen? I mean, we're going to have the announcement of who's running for president, i.e. Joe Biden as a Democrat, and then we're going to get into the presidential election while these investigations of Donald Trump are ongoing. We have this blockbuster, transcripts that have been released. We have his tax returns that were finally released. So it's going to be a big year for Donald Trump. Are you predicting an indictment? And if so, which entity do you think might indict?
I am absolutely, and I've always been predicting an indictment, but you and I have had the conversation where I am very skeptical whether we're going to find a unanimous jury who is going to not have one Donald Trump cult follower on there. But I do think what's happening today in the House with the chaos with the Republicans and the clown car full of crazy people compared to the grace and elegance and productivity on the other side of the Capitol of a Democratic Senate, I think that's going to be something that people are going to pay attention to. But I want to remind you, it's not just going to be Donald Trump. So yes, he will be indicted, I think, by maybe multiple DAs, attorney generals. But don't forget, the next 2 years will be all Joe Biden investigation, all Hunter Biden investigation, and that's going to muddy the water. And in terms of Joe Biden, if his health holds and his vitality holds, I think he can run and he can win. If not, so the next 2 years in the life of an 80-year-old man, that's going to be a big deal. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. It's interesting. Over the holidays, I went to I went out twice. One was a birthday luncheon to a friend of the family who turned 80. And this woman, as I showed the pictures of her to people, they were shocked. They thought she was in her 60s. She still runs, and I do mean run, on a daily basis, an elementary school. So she's dealing with kids ages 4 to like 11. And running this very successful school. And it just made me think about ageism and the way we as Americans think about what 80-year-old people can and cannot do.
Right, Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden.
Well, yeah, I think we look at Joe Biden, but we have to recognize there are lots of 80-year-old people who every day are getting up, going to work. Now, they're not going to the White House. They're not, involved in national and international affairs. But they are going to jobs. They're running businesses. They're running companies. They're running, families and organizations. So I think we're going to learn a lot in this year about the sustainability, the power, the will, the determination, the just resiliency, I think, of that generation. So I would not count Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, any of those folks out, because I think They
Well,
still
I
got
just
more
have to
gas
say,
in the tank.
I just have to say, my mom is 93, super sharp. She could run the country. So Joe has 13 more years as far as I'm concerned.
All right. I love it, Richard. Always good to see you. Thank you again for all of the amazing contributions you made to the show in 2022, helping us make sense of what was probably one of the most emotional political years we've had in a long time. They all are probably that way, but I don't know, 22 felt incredibly emotional, up and down, but in the end, again, just Democrats just kick butt on the national level at so many local races as well. So I'm encouraged.
Let's finish the job. Let's finish the job in 2024, which means we have to start focusing right now and getting young people and people of color to vote at the same level as 65 plus white folks. And then we will fix the country. And it's been an honor to spend so many early mornings with you, Areva, over 2022.
All right. I'll see you out there at Craig's or Spago's or one of those fancy Beverly Hills kind of places, Richard.
I'll be looking for you.
All right. Okay. Can't talk about 2022 without talking about COVID and the rise, the fall, and everything that's happening with COVID. And back to help us make sense of it is Dr. John Moore. He was with us in 21 and 22, and here we are in 23, Dr. Moore, and we're still talking about COVID. Remember when the president said COVID was over? Well, guess what? COVID is not over, and I had family members who were impacted for the second and third time during this holiday season. Dr. Moore, what is going on with COVID? Why are we seeing these cases for people who are fully vaccinated, but yet getting COVID a second and third time?
Yeah, it's interesting that Biden said that, and it's still questionable why he said it. Was it just a slip, or was he trying to create a mood leading up to the midterms to persuade people that it was all over and we can release all social restrictions and just get on with lives as normal? So there may have been a political message in it, but it certainly wasn't accurate in the sense that we are all still dealing with the pandemic. And you know, what we've been seeing all year is the Omicron variant continuing to evolve, to continuing to become more transmissible, continuing to be more capable of bursting through antibody protection, which is principally how vaccines work, and of course also the protection conferred by previous infections. So we are now seeing that infections are continuing to occur at a significant rate, including reinfections, as you say, but we're not seeing the worst outcomes, which is the kinds of hospitalizations and death rates that we saw in 2020 and 2021. So, you know, the death rates in the States peaked at around 3,000 people dying a day. We're now around 400 a day. And it's been pretty stable for the daily death rate. It's been pretty stable on average for the past 6 months. And that reflects population immunity. More and more people have enough immunity, whether by vaccines, infections, or both. They have enough immunity to keep them out of the ICU, keep them off ventilators, and keep them from dying. The people who are still in the hospitals and dying are almost all either unvaccinated, often by choice, which is a very bad mistake, or because they're in what we now understand to be the more vulnerable groups, people over 70, 75, people with pre-existing health conditions, people who are vulnerable. So they are the ones who benefit the most from additional vaccinations, and they are the ones who are most at risk of serious outcomes.
Now, Dr. Moore, those of us who got our initial vaccine, you know, when it first came out at the beginning, I guess it was the beginning of 21, is it the case that everyone now needs, you know, their 2023 initial vaccine? Or what should we be doing from a vaccine standpoint, particularly if you haven't had one like in the last 6 months or so?
Well, following CDC advice is never a bad thing. And the CDC advice is that everyone should get the latest booster, providing you're a few months away from your previous vaccination. That's CDC advice. And the bivalent boosters are a bit better than what went before. They're not so much better that it has to be game changers, but they're at least no worse and somewhat better than the original strain of the vaccine that we took in 2021. So, but that's more important the more vulnerable you are. Again, if you're a senior, if you have a pre-existing health condition, it is much more important to get those latest boosters than if you're a healthy 25-year-old who is not at risk of severe disease and death anyway.
Dr. Moore, one of the things we saw in 2022 were people I'll say burning their masks, right? Where people were like, I'm over it, I don't care. Airport bans were, lifted. Most indoor bans or most indoor mandates as it related to wearing masks were all lifted. Schools did away with them. Again, most public places, movie theaters, restaurants, etc. And I'm just amazed at the low level of voluntary mask wearing. I traveled a great deal in 2022 in lots of airports and saw very few people wearing masks. What do you make of the way we just so quickly threw our mask away despite the high level of infections that we saw?
We're a very ill-disciplined nation and we don't pay attention to public health advice. I mean, the only people I see wearing masks, we wear them in the medical school where I'm working when we're walking through the halls. That's a regulation and it's to protect patients. But you see people of Asian origin on the streets wearing masks because in Far East countries, it's much more culturally normal. You see them in the flu seasons if you're traveling in Asia. We've never done this in the States. And if we did, we would be having less flu and less RSV and less other respiratory infections. It's just not been our thing. It's also not the thing in Europe. When you travel in Europe or you see pictures of airports in Europe, you say the same thing. It's not a culturally normal thing for us to do. And we instantly rejected the safety benefits. We just don't do this. And what can you say? It would help, particularly if you're traveling, to wear a mask on a plane or not so much on a plane, but at an airport where you're interacting with a very large number of people. And if you've been traveling Southwest, you're stuck in a huge line with thousands of other people. So yeah, we don't do this. And I don't have any explanation for it. And, I don't wear it as much now as I used to. We're in this pandemic fatigue mode. We're all fed up with it. And we think if we wish it away, it will go away. But something else
I noticed, Dr. Moore, at the end of 2022 was this, even people who knew they had COVID, not willing to quarantine. I know people who had COVID who had plans for holiday travel or holiday functions, and they said, I'm going to put a mask on and keep it moving. And they were out and about. Is that something we should worry about in 2023, that more and more people who are COVID positive will not even follow the 5-day quarantine rules now?
Yeah, and that 5-day quarantine is misleading. There are an awful lot of cases now of people having symptoms and testing positive for up to 2 weeks. There's some phenomenon going on that is not fully understood, but it's a real thing. It used to be called Paxlovid rebound. In fact, it's not drug-driven. It happens in people who are not taking Paxlovid. So you can be positive for 2 weeks easily now, and the current, so it's the intersection of the virus and our immune systems. There's something complicated and funky being looked at now. But yeah, it's the same as it was pre-pandemic. People coming to work with colds and flu, they think they're heroes. I'm going to work through this cold. I'm a superwoman. I can just deal with this. But by doing so, you always put your colleagues at risk. And we all did it. Let's not be hypocritical about this. Which one of us did not do that? And if COVID for healthy vaccinated people is a bad cold, which it pretty much is for most people in those categories, you can work through it, but you're not very wise and you're not very considerate